What does it mean to work on something that you know you may never finish? What kind of vision does it take to equip a route that you have to wait 14 years for somebody to come along and climb? That's what Randy Leavitt did when he equipped the route Jumbo Love. And Chris Sharma came along 14 years later and climbed what was then the hardest route in North America. This just proves that Randy Leavitt not only sees farther than us, but he sees farther than us both physically and metaphorically. But Randy's story neither begins nor ends just with climbing. He grew up with parents that were deeply forged by the Great Depression. His father used to find bent nails and straighten them to use them in his work. Randy took this work ethic and applied it to his own vision of life. While his stone master friends in Yosemite Valley were dumpster diving and living the dirtbag dream, Randy was going down to San Diego and quietly building a real estate business to achieve his plan A, which was financial freedom and an entire lifetime spent climbing and developing routes all around the American Southwest. Randy pinned tax assessor maps on his walls, and he would scour the foreclosure listings, and at the same time he would take pictures of unclimbed granite walls, and he would study the shadows looking for hidden crack systems, and he would develop these crags and these walls at an incredible scale. Randy always worked with a long-term vision. He believed in delayed gratification. He built systems. He worked hard, and he showed up every day. In this episode of Season 2 of Voice of the Mountains, we're going to go into a different kind of business, a very personal business that was built expressly to enable Randy to climb more. We're going to hear how Randy found his edge in his business and at the same time managed to climb and develop routes at an incredibly high level for 5 decades. If you listen closely, you're going to hear Randy describe being the architect of his life's ambition and then building that dream. It's amazing. This is a life lived as a meditation on vision, effort, and hard work. And listening to Randy, I was really struck. Is there any more compelling expression of the human experience than working hard day after day to build something that endures while acknowledging our own impermanence? It's pure poetry. And Randy Leavitt has been writing verse after verse of poetry with his life. I think you're going to want to listen to this episode. My name is Steve House, and this is Voice of the Mountains. If you're enjoying the show and want to take the next step in your training, join our newsletter and receive a free 4-week sample training plan. Head on over to uphillathlete.com/letsgo, and once you sign up, you'll instantly get a link to try out some of our most popular training plans. It's a great way to get a feel for how we train our athletes for big mountain goals. Check it out at uphillathlete.com/letsgo. That's uphillathlete.com/LETSGO. Welcome, Randy, to Voice of the Mountains. It's really great to have you here.
Well, thanks for inviting me here, and it's nice to talk to a legend like yourself. And you've done an incredible amount of mountaineering, which I always had a high regard for.
Yeah, and that's actually something I'm going to ask you about, because in learning more about you before our conversation, I saw that you idolized alpinists as a teenager when you're coming up and climbing, and that was a curveball I didn't. I associate you with, of course, Yosemite in Southern California and exploratory rock climbing, and the Virgin River Gorge and climbing in Baja, but I never associated you with alpinism. So to hear that you were like a fan of Boardman and Tasker, I was like, oh wow, a fellow spirit.
Yeah, I mean, when I started climbing, it was all focused towards what would get you ready for the big mountains. Bouldering, which would get you ready for rock climbing for big walls, big walls for dealing with logistics and big faces, and then ultimately to the mountains. So really, that's where I thought I was headed all along, and that's where I wanted to be.
Nice. And did you get there? Did you go alpine climbing?
I did. I learned how to alpine climb. I went to Canada, did the normal routine there, and then I went on an expedition in 1986 to Gasherbrum 4 in Pakistan, and we made the second ascent of Gasherbrum 4 of the mountain via a new route. I wasn't one of the summit climbers, but I was on that trip, and it
I
was
forgot
amazing.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
Greg Child. Who else was on that
Tom
trip?
Hargis, great child,
Tom, that's right.
and Steve McCartney Snape, and Steve Rissy, and uh, several other really good climbers.
Yeah, Tom was a mentor of mine. Guided with him at different stages and did a bunch of ice climbing with him a long time ago. And of course, Greg Childs shaped the way a lot of us of my generation thought of climbing. That's a really cool side story. I want to ask you about something you said, a- and I quote, "Climbing doesn't really do anything for humanity." Yet, from my vantage point at least, climbing seems to be one of the best things in your long career and lifetime. I just wanna start there because I think that there's a tension between this sort of conquistadors of the useless idea, this, you know, jousting at windmills idea of climbing and alpinism, and the the actual experience that we have in the mountains, whether it's climbing or skiing or trail running, that people feel and derive and identify a lot of meaning from their time in these pursuits. So somewhere in there is truth. What have mountains actually given you?
Well, they've given me a purpose to there. I think there's something in human nature where everyone needs something, whether it's religion or whether it's an activity or whether it's both religion and an activity or a hobby or maybe just a profession they want to excel at or do something meaningful to themselves. And now that may be curing cancer, which is meaningful to humanity, or it may be climbing mountains, which is sort of not that meaningful to humanity, in my opinion. But everyone needs something, and I've been involved in so many different sports, like foil surfing, big wave surfing, kite surfing, climbing, mountaineering, um, and everyone that is involved in these sports, that's their whole world. So I see all these different snapshots of these different worlds where everyone's got their thing and they're so into it. These guys that do wing foiling now on Mission Bay in San Diego, where I go, that's their whole world. And it's so meaningful and so important to them. And yet there's all these different pursuits. You could be a stamp collector, you could be uh, anything. And all these different pursuits that people have. And I just think that it's human nature. It gives you some sort of meaning and some sort of way to connect with nature or to feel valuable about yourself. And so I think in
Mhm.
that sense it's important, but actually what it actually does is not important in my opinion. What it really does is it helps people. Kind of like,
How does it help people?
well, it keeps them grounded, gives them a purpose, gives them something to occupy their minds with, and something to pursue and get better at. And maybe that's just my perspective. That's what I feel, but that to me, that's sort of an interpretation of those sports and how everyone's into it.
And, when we were chatting before we started recording, I mentioned to you that, this season is about this intersection between people who excel in the business world and people who have also excelled in the mountain sports world. And we have people in different uh, l- places in that spectrum, I guess is the word. And you also have, as you've called it, a plan A and a plan B, and climbing was your plan B. So what c tell us a little bit about your plan A and what that is.
Well, Plan A, I guess you could call it the financial part of my life where I wanted to secure a reasonable financial future and be able to plan for that. So I think the way it started is that when I was a young kid and I wanted to climb as much as I could, I found the best way to do it, to afford it, was to paint houses. I worked for a house painter and eventually started my own business. So here's Randy, the house painter. Someone calls me and says, "Hey, can you do this job?" And I can bust out a house painting job in a week, earn 4 times what someone would be working at a hardware store would earn. And then when that week is over, I'm free for 3 weeks, for the same amount of money. And that
Hmm.
that to me was a good formula. So I thought, oh, I need to work for myself. Um, I did still go to college. My parents helped put me through college, so that was a huge thing at the time. But I kept going with this house painting business and eventually turned into wallpapering. And I think the story led to where I ended up meeting my future business partner that way. I was exposed to people with fair amount of money in nice homes in nice parts of San Diego. So um, as I would go on these climbing trips, work real hard, then go on a climbing trip, work real hard, do a big wall in Yosemite, come back and do another paint job. Um, I I ended up meeting some really interesting people. And when I finished college, I started putting out letters to these people. And I said, I want to start a real estate business. That was what I had focused myself on. And I could see, I grew up in the 70s, so I saw what inflation did to home prices and asset prices. So I thought, well, real estate is something tangible. I can understand it. This is way before the internet, artificial intelligence, where there are all these things you don't understand or can't touch. But real estate was something I could touch. I had experience managing the painting business, and I understood maintenance on properties, so I understood how properties were built. And anyway, I've put out a bunch of letters, and I got a response from one of the guys. He was this gentleman and his wife in La Jolla, California. They lived part time in France and part time in the United States, and he had a big business he was selling and wanted to put the money into real estate. So I became a co-partner with them, got my broker's license. And the interesting part of that, Steve, was that when I was getting ready to cast off on that trip, I had this Himalayan trip planned to the 1986 Gasherbrum 4 expedition to Gasherbrum 4 and Nameless Tower. So I
Hmm.
went to my future business partner as he had just proposed this business plan. And I said, look, I've got this trip I want to do before I do this partnership. And I showed him the description of the trip and the details about it. And he said, absolutely, you've got to do that. He understood the value of these experiences. So it was great. On that trip, I was reviewing this intense long contract that was be between us that would form this 30-year partnership. So a great child was marveling at me, watching me pour through these contract pages, like 40-page contract, as I was, in a snow cave somewhere.
Did you
I,
really carry the contract
I really
like
did.
up
Yeah.
to the higher
Uh
cams?
huh. There was a lot to understand in there. There was a lot of legalese. I mean, I really learned a lot in my business dealings because everything I signed my name to had a consequence. And so you really start to look at the dotting the I's and crossing the T's.
Yeah, and thinking through potential eventualities and implications of
Hmm.
those words. But I would be afraid that my brain wouldn't be functioning well enough at 7,000 meters to be able to
Well,
catch any of that, so
well,
I'm impressed.
I was reading Kurt Vonnegut at 7,000 meters. The contract was more like at base camp.
Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
okay. That's still base camp's 5,000
Yeah.
meters, that's not nothing. That's so interesting. That's so funny. So, what made you focus on real estate? I mean, I understand this trajectory, like, you started with painting, and so you understood houses, as you said, how they're put together, how they're maintained. But you also said something a second ago about how when you're talking about sports and how you could see these windows into all these different worlds that are people's everything, whether it's kite surfing or big wave surfing or rock climbing. Is real estate one of those worlds? And are there even subsets of real estate? As when which one do you, focus on, or which one do you obsess about?
Real estate was one of those worlds, and in the world
Yeah.
I was in, there were probably four other competitors to me in my particular niche of apartment buildings in Golden Hill area of San Diego. So basically, we were like the five best guys at that job at the time, were five most prominent and active. And their whole world was that. Some of these guys had other interests, and some of these guys didn't. The real estate was everything for them.
Hmm.
And for me, I took my job very seriously, and I worked really hard. But for me, it was really a job and a way to secure a financial future. It wasn't something that I wanted to do forever.
Hmm. Has that changed?
No,
You've been
no,
doing
no.
it
I've
for a long
retired from the
time.
real estate business more or less. I'm still a California real estate broker, but I'm very inactive compared to what I used to do.
Was there ever, like, this fascination with the business of real estate? What were you doing? Were you buying and flipping? Were you a broker? Were you buying apartment complexes? What was your niche?
I was a real estate broker and basically an asset manager and property manager all in one. So we would buy a building. You could do a 1031 exchange, which was a tax deferred exchange. And we would say buy 4 units, exchange to 8 units, exchange to 16 units. In the meantime, maybe pick up another 8 unit building. And this coincided with the early 90s where there was a financial downturn in California, especially. It was like a depression here, way worse than '08, way worse than maybe what's to come. It felt that way. It felt like California was in a complete depression, especially in the real estate market. So I had started my business in '87, and by '92, '93, when this was in full force, I really understood the business, and that's when I started making hay. And that was buying properties from banks who had foreclosed on them. I knew the asset managers of the banks. When something would come available, they would call me or I would call them. I would take the property off their hands, manage it, because the banks didn't want to own property. They didn't want to be a property manager.
Right. So, let's go back to climbing for a second. How do you're most famous, at least in for me, as being just such a prolific route developer over your life. And I've developed routes, both all kinds, from sport rock climbs to mixed climbs, trad, like all the whole gamut. And you're, I'd say, maybe like one generation ahead of me, and you came up in that era where it was strictly trad climbing. You lived through and adapted to the sport climbing era, and now we've got this, I think, sort of equilibrium that we're in now, where everybody does, let's say, everything. I mean, at least climbers like you and I, we're gonna clip bolts, we're gonna place gear. Doesn't really make that much difference to us. So, when you were getting into that and developing routes, like, tell me about your process, like, why develop routes? I mean, I know how much work it is. I mean, not just this hiking around and trying to find the nice piece of rock that might ha have a little gem in it, but all of it, like spending the money, buying the equipment, cleaning, scraping, making it safe. I mean, there's so much that goes into it. I mean, you don't really appreciate how much work has gone into developing the routes that we climb on a daily basis until you've developed, 10 or 20 routes by yourself and realize how much just labor it is. Tell me about that process for you.
There's a lot of reasons why I like it. There's the exploration, the newness, the discovery, the excitement of seeing something that no one has ever done. The You get your name in a guidebook. There's all these little things that are perks about developing routes, but for me, it was very personal. It wasn't about getting my name in guidebooks or a lot of this other stuff. It was really about a way to push myself in a unique way. Um, I guess when you do a new route, you don't know how hard it's going to be. You don't know what kind of things you're going to have to work out in order to do it. And it presents itself to you, the rock does. And that's what I loved about it. It made me a better climber. I would be. let's say, for example, you go and you want to get in shape and you go into a gym and you have all these gym machines. To me, I walk into a gym and I want to do nothing in a gym. I see the bikes, I see the weightlifting machines, I see everything in there, and I'm uninspired. But finding a new climb is inspiration for me. It's like it lights a fire under me, and that is the part I loved about it. If you could imagine maybe a gym machine, you don't even know what the gym machine looks like when you're doing new routes. You this thing appears and it all of a sudden you have to, oh, I got to get really good at this or really good at that, and you end up doing things you never thought you could do before.
Mhm.
That was is it's really inspiration for me.
And in that same way, when you were on your real estate career, did that same thing happen? Did you end up doing things you never thought you'd do before?
I got into situations, yeah, I never thought I would do, but not in the nice way like you think.
Okay.
I mean, I was dealing with low income apartment buildings in San Diego in rough neighborhoods, and I got in situations where I wanted a bulletproof vest or other things like that, where there was just such filth and squalor that you wouldn't believe what you see on the street level. But I dealt with it all, and I made it work. And what satisfied me in those situations was, say, I would buy an apartment building that was just in horrible shape and had some good tenants, but had some really bad ones. And a year later, that place would be all cleaned up, and I'd have housing for people that needed it, and they were good people. And so, I mean, there was satisfaction, but it was completely different and sort of gnarly compared to rock climbing.
Really? Because, rock climbing and developing new routes can be pretty gnarly
it
and dirty and just beat you up.
it can, but I don't know. I don't mind the work. I've
Yeah.
always been a hard worker. I didn't mind the work.
Yeah. And the cleaning up low-income apartment buildings, that's also a lot of hard work.
It
Like,
is.
it is. So was there a similar fascination with what you would was there a similar, like, sense of suspense? Like, when I'm climbing or, trying to uncover a new route, there is a sense of suspense. You're, "Oh, how is this gonna unfold? What are those moves gonna be like? Is that hold gonna break? Is it" Did you have that kind of experience, like, going into a new apartment complex, a new deal, you know, all of that? Or was it just like, "Oh, I have to do this now?"
Well, I guess going into a new property, when they would become available, a lot of times they would advertise them, and the etiquette was that you wouldn't tell the tenants it's for sale. You don't want to go to an apartment building and say, "Hey, I'm looking at this; it's for sale," because it just adds insecurity to the tenants. They worry about what's going to happen. So
Mhm.
generally speaking, you go there and you start look around as if maybe you're a prospective tenant. Um, I guess there is that discovery where you would go to a property and I would look at what the access is, what the traffic patterns are, what the plumbing is like, individually metered. Is it a master meter? Am I paying for everyone's power? What's wrong with this property? What are how why is there all this dry rot and structural problems, or are the bones of this property good? What kind of people are there? I talked to the tenants, and a lot of them were Hispanic, so I tried to learn how to speak Spanish as best I could. So it was a really interesting, but it wasn't exciting and rewarding like climbing. I mean, there's nothing like climbing that I've found that is so wonderful, that you can create a climb that lasts for a long time and is this sort of represents your work. It's not the same way. But there were some similarities.
You know, my grandfather was a welder his whole life. He was a union welder and pipe fitter union, I forgot what number. And I have this picture of him that still sits on my desk, and it's him with his lunchbox, like, one day going to work, and he's and I keep that on my desk because it's a reminder of, he went every day and crawled inside pipes for the most part because they were doing big infrastructure projects and welded the pipes together all day, every day for years. And then I think about what I get to do and how diverse it is, and I'm pushing pixels, and I'm recording podcasts, and I'm coaching, and I'm researching, and all of this stuff, it's frankly it feels more like play most of the time. It feels more like climbing. And I realized that, I'm super lucky that for him, my grandfather, it was a job in the kinda classic sense of, like, he had to do it. It wasn't a question, and he did it, and, when you talk to him about his work, he didn't talk about, like, how much fun it was. He talked about, like, the 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 cuts with the torch that he was able to do super well, the other guys that could do things that had skills that could make these incredible perfect welds, this, like, really high quality sort of craftsman level, and that's what he talked about, and so what I'm fishing for here is where that is in, your real estate career. Where was that craftsmanship or that intrigue? And or maybe there wasn't, or was it really like a journeyman thing, like you just, like, put your cap on backwards and rolled up your sleeves and got in there and just did it?
One of the things you said that just reminded me of my experience in real estate was how hard your grandfather worked and the kind of people that I was around improving these properties. A lot of contractors and workers, concrete workers, woodworkers, carpenters, everything. And it made me have a huge appreciation for people that work hard. And in your
Mm,
grandfather's case, that was his little niche. But you asked me about what kind of was my little thing in real estate, and that was I was able to construct more information about properties that would give me an advantage over everyone else. And so I think that was the thing that kind of got me excited about the real estate business. So there are things called tax assessor parcel maps, which basically is a satellite view of all the tax boundaries, parcel boundaries, and their tax parcel numbers. And with those numbers, you could find out who owned what. And I made giant maps that I posted on my wall that I taped together, Xerox, and taped these maps together of all the parcels in the areas that I was working, which was Bankers Hill, Golden Hill, and part of University Heights. With those, I would go around and photograph each property with the tax parcel number on it. And I would follow notices of default. And this was all collecting information, sort of like the internet does for us now. But I was willing to do this and other people didn't. And so I had more information, better information than I think any of my competitors. And that kind of gave me the edge. So it's also random deals that you get sometimes, but that's I spent a lot of time on that. And I guess I'm pretty proud of that. I hadn't really even thought about that for decades.
yeah.
Uh,
I mean, that's a classic advantage, right? Like, one of the things I've picked up along the way is, business usually happens because you either are faster than your competitors at getting to a particular product, or you have an information advantage. And whether that's like an IP advantage, or like you have a law degree, so you have a special piece of knowledge, and you had that in terms of understanding to a very detailed, like, level, and you because you did all the legwork and built these maps, paper maps, took photos, obviously, like, were printed on, you know,
yeah.
people forget in the
Oh,
age of digital cameras that we used to have to, like, get the film developed and then get, like, the little, 3x4, printed things and pick them up at the drugstore and all that. You had those thumbtacked on the wall, I'm sure, and that was your information advantage. That was your
mhm.
business advantage. That was your running advantage.
Most people don't know what a 1 hour photo developer is anymore. But that was revolutionary. I could go and get a roll of film developed in an hour and have all these printed pictures.
Right? That
So,
was
yeah. I mean, I've watched things change so much with climbing and everything else. It's just amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I just had someone recently request an image from my climbing path, the picture I took over, let's see, in 2003, so it would have been 22 years ago. And I was like, that's on a slide. Like, I have to get it scanned. I don't have it. And they just didn't, like, the photo editor was like, what? Like, I mean, he knows what it
Just
was, but he just hadn't, like, encountered anyone. I'm like, yeah, I guess I'm old now. It was funny. So one of the stories, we talked a little bit, chatted a little bit about the RuPaul face before we started recording, and you were talking about like the size of the wall. One of the things that was my competitive advantage, if you will, when I was researching that climb, that trying to climb a route there, which was a multi-year thing, just the research. I got in touch with a photographer that was going on assignment for National Geographic and doing a assignment in the area where he would be right at the RuPaul face. And actually he said like what I need, I told him what I needed. Like I needed like clear shots of the whole face from as far horizontally back as he could get with shot with a really good lens on a tripod. And he did that. I can't remember how many there were, but it was roughly 30 pictures. And then I printed them all out 8 by 10. And then I taped them all. And it was like a puzzle, right? Like I got like, he made a grid with the pictures. He just started at the top left and he went across the sky and worked his way down with these zooms. And there's about 30 of them. And I had them all printed out. I taped them together and I had this map of this giant picture of the RuPaul face. It was probably like, 6 feet tall and 6 feet wide. And that's how we like studied the face and like figured out like where we could go. We didn't take it to base camp because it was this huge thing, right? Like, and
Yeah.
you had to tape it together. Like, you can't do that in a base camp. But by then, we didn't need to. I just needed to do it at home, and that was like, I was, I just did that legwork of like finding the guy, talking to him, convincing him, getting the film, reimbursing him for it, and he was happy to not charge me for taking the pictures or anything, but I paid for his materials and that stuff, and like nobody ever thinks of that, right? They're like, oh, you climbed that thing, that's so gnarly. Yeah, that was gnarly, but it was also really hard. Like, just getting all those pictures and mapping out the route was a huge task, and people don't think about that. And it's same with like real estate. Oh, you bought apartments and rented them out. Sounds super easy, but like you there's like these depths to things, right? Like you went in deep. It's super interesting.
Yeah, that's handy on a mountain because one of the things I find so intriguing about climbing mountains is that one little passage can unlock a whole section of the mountain where,
Yeah.
let's say you come up to an impossible buttress, but you figured out that maybe there's this little ledge system that skirts around to the right and that opens up some ice couloir or something that you don't really see
Yeah.
from anywhere else.
Yeah.
And in fact, we would do that kind of stuff on El Cap when we would do new routes. We would photograph it also at different times of the day so we could see
Yeah.
shadows getting cast.
Yeah, for
And then
sure.
we'd be up on the wall and we'd look at these photographs, these kind of Xerox printouts that we had, and go, oh yeah, I think we need to, head over in this direction. We can't see where we're going, but we think there's something out there.
Yeah.
But on the Rupel face, that's the whole thing on steroids. That's the
Well,
biggest arena in the world, really, is climbing on a wall like that.
yeah, it's an insanely complex wall, right? Like just so big, in all dimensions, horizontally, vertically, everything. But um, one of the things that you mentioned was there was a section. We only had one time of day, right? We had this image from early morning, or kind of not super early morning, not like 5 or 6, but like I think it was probably like 8:30 or 9. And there was a section where we could not see how we were going to get through that. It was just like, and it was quite high. It was like over around 7,000 meters. And that we hit that section mid morning, or maybe it was noon on day 3. And it was like a huge gamble, right? Like if we didn't find, and we climbed, and we couldn't actually see, like you said, there was a couloir, and we couldn't see the couloir until literally we got right up under it. And
Mm-hmm.
that whole morning, we're just like, we were like so nervous, like we could get completely shut. Like this just could be turned into a big wall climb, and we are not equipped for that. There's no way we can do that up here. And we think there's something in here, like it makes sense that there would be, and there was like a grade 5 ice pitch that went up to a bunch of grade 3 and grade 4 ice that we followed for a very long way. So it was amazing, but we couldn't see that until we got there. So but you have to do what, that's all great and all. Like we can talk about, oh, we found these amazing pitches and they were beautiful pitches and they were super rewarding to climb and discover and all of those things. But all those other pieces of the puzzle we're talking about, like getting the pictures made, whether it's El Cap or your apartments, all that homework is pretty unglamorous, but it actually is what kind of sets the foundation for being able to unlock a new pitch on El Cap. I mean, how cool is that to be able to? I've never climbed a new route on El Cap, never will, obviously. I mean, how cool is that to climb new routes in the valley of all places, right?
Well, it's you get lucky as you get more prepared. The more prepared you are, the more lucky you get. And you can see that in your climbing, and that's the same in my climbing. And that goes for everything. The safety preparations, the kind of food you're bringing, especially in mountaineering. Just every little step you take is sort of preparing you to be well positioned to make a summit push, whether it's your own health or the psyche of the team or whatever it is. So it all adds up after time, and in a lifetime, it adds up big time.
Yeah, and that's so interesting how things accrue over decades. And I think this is one of the things, like, as an older climber to an older climber, like if I had only known then what I know now, right?
Hmm.
I think that, like, thinking back about some of the climbing I did in my 20s, man, like, oh man, if I had known then what I know now, it would have completely been a different outcome. And youth
If,
is
if I
wasted
if I
on the
had
young.
only had tomorrow's Wall Street Journal today.
Yeah, okay, yeah, right, right. Do you see your kind of, you were, of course, part of the famous stone masters. People who follow climbing history will know that term and what that represents, and it's been very celebrated in climbing as it should have been. And you had amazing, contemporaries, whether it was Backer or Yanarian or Kauk or Bridwell or Dale Bard, who just very recently passed. Very, very sad to hear that. I know you knew him and climbed new routes with Dale, so sorry for your loss there. How did that you there? That's the Stone Masters celebrated, to me at least, this sort of dirtbag approach to climbing, living in Camp 4, eating out, dumpster diving, like that whole thing. You took a very different path. You were sort of the anti-dirtbag, I would say. You were going, working hard, making a living, thinking about the future, thinking about financial security. You weren't waiting for, a dope plane to fall out of the sky so you could hike in and, like, pick up some free money. You were actively working on that. Do you see that as a radical choice? Was that radical in your friend group at the time, or were there other people doing the same thing?
No, it was very different choice. But I did the dirt bagging thing with the Stone Masters, and it was great. But to me, it was not. There wasn't a future in it, and it was sort of like, well, hey, I'm 18, 19, 20 years old. Uh, sure, we'll do this for a while, but I could see that there wasn't a future in it.
Could everybody see that, though, that was present?
Now, a lot of these guys, they weren't thinking about themselves being 40 or 50 years old or 60 years old. It just, and it's part of being young, right? You can't imagine, youth is wasted on the young, as they say, because they don't imagine what it's like later on. But somehow I had a perspective on that. My, could have been the way it was brought up, or, I mean, everyone's different, but I had this sort of clock in my head, like, I don't want to be doing this when I'm 50.
You
And
know,
I think I was ambitious too. It wasn't just, oh, I want to provide for myself financially, but I had ambitions to do something in business. It always was of interest to me. So there was that aspect of it as well.
tell me about that. Like, what do you mean by ambition? What was, what called you? What was the hunger? Like, I understand, like, climbing, we talk about, like, feeding the rat or being hungry or feeling a drive to climb or put up a route. How did that manifest for you, like, in your business life?
I I think to answer that, I would say that I did a lot of reading when I was young. I read a lot of classics, and I felt like one thing I've learned, and it's really resonated throughout my life, is that human nature doesn't change. And so you can read these really old books, and they would have all this stuff which is involved, these old stories, but humans don't really change.
Hmm.
All the stuff around us changes, and but we don't change. So I did a ton of reading. One of the authors I read was Ayn
Mm-hmm.
Rand, and
Mm-hmm.
that left an impression on me. And I think that was kind of the business sort of side of me that latched onto that and said, "That's cool. I want to experience some of that." And so that I would say it was from reading,
Mm-hmm.
and also my dad grew up during the Depression. My dad and mom grew up during the Depression, and it was really hard. I watched how hard he worked his whole life and how he straightened nails out, that were used, and would use everything, just that mentality. And I wanted to provide for myself and not be caught in that, as so many people were during that time.
Tell me about your father's work ethic. Did that he was a child in the Great Depression, or
Hmm.
was he like a young man?
He was a child in the Great Depression.
Okay.
Probably he was 10, 12,
Okay.
15 during the Great Depression. And so it is a very, impressionable time for him. I mean, it just stuck with him. And then he was part of the greatest generation during World War II. So there was pretty heavy load that generation carried.
This is one of the things that I think is interesting when we're talking about human nature and how it's eternal in a sense, but the the greatest generation, had the hardest row to hoe, right? Like they had the depression and they had the war, many of them, whether you're abroad fighting or at home manufacturing. I mean, it was tough. It was hard. And then they came back and then had, relative stability and all of a sudden thrived in so many ways. And I think that they paid a heavy price, right? Like I think we celebrate them, but if I remember, I was really close to my grandparents and, they were very blue collar people and, they and their friends were very sullen. Like they were like, I mean, they were part of the greatest generation, but they were tough. Like they were disciplined. They were harsh. They were, I don't know. They didn't, there was, there was no bullshit, and there was no very little gray. Things were very black and white in their world. Did that affect was that like was your experience of your father and your parents like that? And that how did that like shape you as a climber and as a business guy?
Oh, that was a lot of the way my parents were, and but they also didn't talk about it.
A
So
hundred
there was
percent.
that aspect, and I have to ask them things like, "What was it like?" And they were, "Oh, we were digging up turnips in the yard, you know, to eat," and just stuff that you would just take for granted, and people would roam by, and everyone would try to help each other out, and feed each other, and they lost everything. My parents were blue collar, and their so was their family, and that's the way it was. I don't know how it affected me as a climber. It made me want to not waste time. I felt like you never know what's going to happen in life, and you want to take everything you can and do the best with it. So kind of maybe instilled a sense of urgency in me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So one of the sports I want to dig into with you is surfing, and you went on water sports in general, but specifically, I want you to tell us a little bit about this experience you had on Todos Santos Island, where you had a near death experience. You want to walk us through what that experience real quick?
Big wave surfing is pretty exciting. You're trying to catch a wave paddling in. This is before tow-in surfing. This is before jet skis were in the channel to come and rescue you. This is before inflation vests, so you could pop these CO2 cartridges and float up to the top, or just wear like an inflation suit. So Yeah, I mean, I wasn't anything like a great big wave surfer. I was just a big wave surfer, a climber who idolized that sort of fantasized about that sort of thing. And so I went to met a guy named Chris Hubbard who took me kind of on the surfing tour to get ready for Toto Santos. And we would go to different places and he would step it up each time he saw that I was able to take some of the beatings involved and manage myself in the ocean, know where to be to catch the wave. So when you're big wave surfing, you're just basically sitting, waiting for this mountain to form in front of you. And it's really kind of intimidating because you have to be willing to sit there and wait for it. Most people start panicking and paddling for the shoulder, for the channel, whatever. But if you figure out the spot you need to sit, you sit there and wait, and you need to be at the bottom of the thing when it's starting to unload so that as you're paddling down the face, it's almost passing you by, but you're catching it right at the right moment before it passes you by because it's moving so fast and so big. So we had a great day at Toto Santos. It was huge out there. They would call it like 20 Hawaiian, so you can double the size of that to be the wave face on these waves.
Wow.
It was a big day, kind of unruly and rough. Anyway, I thought I had figured out where to sit that day. There's all these different places to sit depending on the size of the swell. And I saw Chris paddle past me, and he's pointing to the horizon, and he goes, "Here it comes! Here it comes a big one!" And I go, "Yeah, I know. I'm waiting for it." And I miscalculated. I was too deep and too far inside, so the whole thing unloaded on me. It was like having a sport climb break on your face. It was it just explodes, and then the white water drives really deep, so you try to swim below it, and it held me down for two waves. And as the first wave passed and I wasn't coming up for the second wave, I started to kind of check out, like my vision narrowed to like a tunnel where I looked like I was looking down a tunnel of light, and my fingers were getting tingly. And I thought to myself in a real calm way, wow, this is how you drowned. This is actually how it happens. Kind of just almost detached from myself. And then I thought, man, it'd be a really freaking good idea to get some air. And I start pulling on the leash and pulling for the surface as the second wave passed, and I got a breath of air, and then I got obliterated like on every single wave after that. It just first, it was like 40-foot faces breaking on you. And then at the end, it was like 15-foot faces on the inside, just these little inside waves. I just got washed all the way through. But that was quite an experience. And I thought I was done surfing that day. I paddled over to the boat and crawled into the ponga and got in the fetal position, and I was done. But after that date, I thought, wow, well, that's the worst it's going to get. So I can really do this. So it had the opposite effect. Instead of stopping me from doing it, it made me more emboldened.
I've seen this with alpinists, right? Like where they're in situations, the details are different, but the overall arc of the story is the same. Like you almost die and you somehow survive, mostly out of luck, maybe a little skill, whatever. And then they're like, oh, okay, that wasn't so bad. I'm still here. And you've also talked, I've very eloquently about how you are not a risk taker, you're a risk manager. And so talk to me about like how this near death experience turned into a risk management lesson rather than a risk taking lesson. Because some people would say, oh, I was taking a risk, I almost died, so therefore I will take no more risk and then I won't die. You took it a different way. You're like, well, I didn't die, so I can do this more and I know more about how to manage for it.
Also, at the same time, came toe in surfing. So I was doing this paddle in surfing. That was a big day. I did big days after that. And as far as risk management, I would be a little better about lining up where the channel is on that particular day, where the takeoff spot is. I felt like it was still under my control to some degree, and that I could manage the risk. Whereas alpine climbing, I went on that Gasherbrum 4 expedition, and that was the year that a bunch of prominent climbers died on K2. And I watched avalanches scream down faces on the Nameless Tower and on Gasherbrum 4. that were so random that I thought, wow, this is almost beyond what kind of risk management I can really deal with. And so that scared me a bit out of alpine climbing. I mean, I
Hmm.
think it's way more serious than I knew it was serious. I left that experience thinking that it's extremely serious and maybe it's not something I want to do if I want to die of old age. But surfing, I felt like I still had it, within my range of control. And then maybe a couple of years after that, tow in surfing came along and it changed everything. Now we could tow into these waves that were that big and not even be scared. It was crazy that you'd be towing behind a jet ski on a rope and the jet ski would kind of position you in over the boil, over where it's going to break, and you could let go and you're not out of breath. You're not just paddling for your life to get into the wave. You're just calm and you're breathing and you're standing straight up and down. You let go of the rope and you have this short board and you can decide what part of the wave you want to be on, how deep you want to go. And it's almost like a feeling of invincibility compared to and ease compared to what we were experiencing as big wave paddling surfers. And so as soon as I did that, that was like, oh my God, that is the e-ticket. That is the stuff, I want that. And it was so fun. We had
Hmm.
5, 6, 7 good years out there at Totos before it became too crowded really with paddle surfers to do that. Because they don't, you don't want to be towing with paddle guys. We used to tow
Right.
from first light till 9:30 when they showed up. And then we would and take the day off and then go, for the last hour and a half of light.
Hmm. Hmm.
Now they all have their own jet skis and they all paddle. So anyway,
Yeah.
uh,
But, one of the things that I hear you saying from my perspective is that, you were, I can't remember the words you used, but you're so familiar with the ocean and the environment. Two things happened. One, you're really comfortable in the ocean, where to be, where not to be. You're learning all the time and getting better at that. And two, the technology just changed and it made it a order of magnitude easier, safer, more fun. With I think I don't know that the technological part of that has happened with alpinism, but I would say that for me, getting to know every aspect of the mountain so deeply and so well. Like one of the reasons I pursued a mountain guide track professionally was okay, this forces me to learn everything about snow and avalanches and weather and all these other skills that I need to be safe in these complicated environments, as safe as possible. So I do think that, like, you see this with business guys too, where that I've talked to, where they can take a lot of risk because their understanding of a particular niche is so deep, and they're seeing patterns or recognizing things because they've been, they're at level 30. They started at level 1, but they've sort of ratcheted up. You went to the Karakoram one expedition, did a number of climbs on that expedition, but you didn't go back year after year after year.
I think the hack on alpinism that's made it safer and the technology is really the weather prediction.
For sure. Yeah.
But as far as going back to the Himalayas, that coincided with starting that partnership, and I didn't think that I could do both Himalayan climbing and this business. I had to make a choice. So I thought, well, I was never that good at I was never as good as I thought I should be at free climbing, sport climbing. And I can do this free climbing, trad climbing, sport climbing, and still be a businessman in San Diego. And I can't be a Himalayan climber and still be this. So if I'm a Himalayan climber, how do I support myself? Well, it's a full-time job getting ready for each expedition, as you know, getting
Yeah.
sponsors and all that. We had sponsors for our trip, and it's a lot of work, a lot of commitment. So
Yeah.
that was a decision I had to make, and it made it a little easier thinking that I'd probably die if I was Himalayan climber full time.
I'm still fascinated that this made you more bold and not more cautious. Did did the near death experience give you sort of permission somehow to live differently, or was it like, I'm still trying to understand how you reached this conclusion?
I think when you have near death experiences, you reflect on things differently. I've had them with climbing, but they were more like, hey, I was halfway chopped through that rope when I was Jumaring 2,500 feet above the deck, and I got past the chop in the rope, but it wasn't an experience. It was more like a really bad situation, and you get past it. There was no physical, nothing happened physically. Well, yeah, I almost died because of bad luck of where this rope was rigged, but the surfing was more of a physical process, almost like a birthing or something, where it's and so at least an impression on you where you really feel like you've gone through something and
Hmm.
reflected on your life. So it did make me more bold for a while surfing until I started tow surfing, and then you get used to the jet ski and not getting cleaned up all the time. Oh, you still get throttled pretty heavily on those waves when you wipe out, but it's a way different.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm sure some of the listeners can appreciate that. I've never been a surfer. My claim to fame was because I worked for Patagonia for so many years. We would often be thrown into these little impromptu surf camps, and my first wave I ever rode. I was pushed into by Jerry Lopez. And that's
Yeah,
pretty
nice.
much the highlight of my surfing career. I was like, after that, I was like, I think I'm going to retire. It's not ever get like, I'm never going to get more like street cred than like being pushed into a wave by one of the absolute legends. So it's like, so yeah.
I've had the privilege of surfing with Chenard, and I think Jerry Lopez was there too at Hollister Ranch.
Oh
So
yeah.
it's these guys are legends in the sport, and it's pretty cool to see them.
So, you made a comment that big walls came naturally for you because they were a combination of risk management, systems engineering, and long term physical strain and suffering. But sport climbing didn't come naturally to you. So, and I don't know what year this was, but you can fill in the blanks here. You built a big climbing gym in your garage. Like you took a 4-car garage and you turned it into a bouldering gym. I mean, this is way before indoor climbing was a thing where there's a gym on every corner, pretty much like there is now. I mean, now we have private equity money going around the country trying to open as many gyms as they can as fast as they can. You did things like made took dental impressions. You'll have to tell me about this to make the shapes of the holds of the out in the wild, and then bring them back to your gym so you could train on the exact shapes. I mean, people do this now, and sometimes it's almost like a little controversial. They'll, recreate, you know, certain sections. Josh Wharton in his home gym has the crux of Freerider like set up, and you can
Uh,
like, and he can cycle that crux and do it all day, right? Exactly, right. It's all measured out, like and you were doing this decades before, so this was a time, and Tony Yaniro was a big part of this. Tony contributed an excellent essay in the Training for the New Alpinism book that we published almost 10 years ago now about his training and because you guys were really early on this idea of, okay, I need to get my body stronger to be able to do these things that my mind wants it to do. Take us back
I,
there.
I bought a home in '87 that had a 4-car garage, and that's where I built that gym starting in 1987. Um, the I had the crux of Scarface there. I had the crux of Planet Earth, and Planet Earth is where I took dental impressions of this thing I call the bottomless pocket and the bone crusher pocket. And so that was a very important, I don't know, V whatever, V double digit move high up on the wall. So some of this was sort of started by Tony. I mean, a lot of it was he was always thinking ahead, one step or two or three or five steps ahead of everyone else. And so Tony thought, well, hey, we're trying to do this climb. Let's not lower to the ground each time we fall. Let's just hang on the rope and try it again. That's hang dogging, right? And that was frowned on. And then he would train for specific muscles for like thin hand cracks. They have a certain set of muscles you need in your hands to actually climb those well. Tony trained on them. So he would figure out a lot of stuff, and I was like a sponge, just going, "Oh yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense." You know, a lot of the stuff we're doing made a lot of sense. So I just carried that forward in my climbing, and I didn't really let the what was considered okay or not okay during that day, as long as or during that time period, as long as I felt good about what I was doing. That's the way I did my climbing.
Hmm.
So um,
Was
that
that
gym, unfortunately, just that house just got sold. I had sold it to my friend Rudy Hoffmeister, and Rudy owned it for, I don't know, 11 or 12 or 15 years, and then he finally sold it in to a flipper, and they've just torn the gym out just recently. So that's a sad ending
oh
to
no.
that gym. But I retained this. I had thought ahead, like I knew this gym wasn't going to last forever, so I had all these famous climbers sign this access door that was to the storage on one of the storage pods within the wall. And so I took that, with Rudy's permission, I took that door and put it in my house. So I have that door with all
Nice.
the climber signatures, which is my memento from that wall.
Nice. Nice. I mean, this was 87. I mean, I think that's about the time that the Vertical World opened in Seattle. The first climbing gym in North America was probably, or maybe it was early 90s. I don't remember, but could you even get climbing holds, or were you just making your own, just creating wooden blocks and gluing stones onto the wall, or what?
You could get some. Entreprise was making
Oh, they were.
holds.
Okay.
Tony made holds, and he made custom holds. So a lot of the wall was also inset pockets that I made, where you would cut a hole in the wall and put a pie tin, like an aluminum pie tin behind it, and fill it with Bondo, fill the hole with Bondo, so that you could create sort of a finger pocket, or however, one finger, two finger, four finger, and it wouldn't present itself as a giant jug that you could stand on when you were climbing on the wall. So it actually made the wall feel taller. In other words, you're down low on these just four finger jugs that are inset, and as you climb past them, you can barely get your toes in. So it wasn't like having a giant jug there,
Hmm.
and it,
Hmm.
it really made the climbing realistic on the wall, and
Which
helped
is
train us for one finger, two fingers
which
pockets.
is which is actually one of my complaints about climbing gyms is everything sticks out. And
Hmm.
that's not realistic. Like that's not how the rock is for the most part, right? Like very few rocks have like big exo sort of features. They usually, like you said, pockets, cracks, edges that are flush.
Hmm.
Hmm. Yeah, interesting. I mean, I think that we need to bring back the Bondo pockets to the local climbing gyms. The problem with those is they can't change them and wash them and clean them and move them, and I guess that's the argument against Bondo pockets.
Yeah, and there's just a lot of work. I'd spend so much time in my gym with a gas mask on and this Bondo, and Tony and I had figured out the exact perfect kind of sand to use. You use silica sand and I think we were using 120. We figured that was ultimately the best sand for skin wear and skin friction. And this stuff called Bondo household putty. I used gallons and gallons of that stuff. It was
You're like their big
it,
customer. They're like,
it
who's
worked
buying all
really
this
well.
stuff in
Yeah,
San Diego?
I got it at Home Depot. So
Nice. Nice. I want to talk a little bit about Clark Mountain. And you've, in my understanding, have kind of gone through these big periods of time where you were developing an area, like areas, particular crag. And I think that's normal, right? Like you find a crag and there's not just one good route there. There's a bunch of different climbing opportunities there, and you develop that over time. And Clark Mountain is this sort of very unique, very stunning climbing area, set up quite high outside of Las Vegas. Tell us about how you were kind of one of the first on the scenes. There were other, Jorge Visser was there. Like this was sort of the post sport climbing boom, I would say. A lot of sport climbing had been kind of established and accepted, and we'd been through that sort of little hiccup of climbing history, and it was and you found this incredible, I mean, I can't call it a piece of limestone. It's really a mountain of limestone that's up there. Tell us a little bit about how you ended up there.
we would, when I would take commercial flights, airline flights, I'd always look out the window, try to get a non-wing window seat. And I saw this thing outside of Vegas that was this big mountain with looked like cliffs on it. And when you would drive down the 15 freeway or drive north on the 15 freeway from California into Nevada, on the west side of the freeway, this east facing mountain had shadows at 10 in the morning. And I'm thinking, well, why is an east facing mountain cliff, and the cliff looks like dirt? Why does it have shadows at 10 in the morning? And well, it's the simple math is it's severely overhanging. And that's why. So finally, after flying commercially and looking out the window where there might be roads, this is before Google Earth and all that, I made a trip out there, and I thought I found it, and I was ecstatic. I got down from the car and I looked back up it and I go, that's really good. I'm going to start bolting that. This was probably like 1989 or 1990.
Oh, it's earlier than I thought then, because we were still in the sport climbing, uh, whatever we call it, boom, revolution.
Yeah, and it was still controversial to be a sport climber in California.
Yeah, for sure.
And this crag I would see on my way to the Virgin River Gorge, which was my new hangout after I had some run-ins with Backer at Joshua Tree. I was just like, I needed a new scene for a while. So anyway, I found Clark, or we thought we found Clark, and I'm driving down the road afterwards a different way than we came in, and I look in the rear view mirror and I see the real Clark. And I thought, oh my gosh, I thought I was at this cliff and I was really at another satellite cliff on the mountain. And now here's the real cliff. And so we just ran up there, just bushwhacking and hacking our way up. Didn't know where the road was. So we just incredibly long hike. I got to the base of the third tier and I thought, well, this is an amazing piece of porcelain like limestone. Too bad there's no holds, but I'll climb up to this traversing ledge and touch the actual wall. And I look up and I touch it and my hands just wrap around buckets. And I thought, wow, I didn't even see those from the ground. So that was a huge moment. And then
Wow.
I just ran back with the drill as fast as I could.
That sounds like every root developer's dream to because you're right. Like if I have been in that situation, get up, oh, there's a cliff where I used to live in Colorado, limestone. It wasn't very big, but so beautiful. And it's just so smooth. Like,
Mm-hmm.
man, this would be such a great place to climb if it had any holds on it. It just didn't. So it's like, it's amazing how much has to come together to allow us to even put up these roots. So that sounds like an incredible. I can really feel your excitement there.
The unfortunately the jugs ended after the first pitch or the first, say, 80 feet. And then it
Oh,
became this smooth head wall, but still pocket lines. And that's where I saw Jumbo Love. And
okay.
to me, I always look for the best route on the wall to bolt first because that's the king line. And Jumbo Love was a king line on the third tier. Clark, it was a really incipient crack. You could hardly see a crack unless you had binoculars, but almost a fracture running the length of the wall with pockets on the sort of this crack line. But you couldn't really call it a crack. You could see it once you see it, more like a seam.
Mm-hmm.
And that became Jumbo Love. I bolted that. I just saw that was everything I thought could be done on that route, but I thought there was no way I could do the whole thing. And I just shelved the idea of that one, started doing all these other lines that were easier. And finally, we got Sharma out there saying, I forgot 2007, whenever it was that he did that route. So it was really cool to see that happen after seeing and bolting that route.
Yeah. So what my notes say that it was 14 years between your bolting it and Chris climbing it. You know, what is it? Okay, I understand, and maybe this is the explanation that you just bolted the king line. You're like, that's the king line. But if you didn't have the feeling that you were going to be able to actually climb it, why bother? Why not just let somebody else put in that work and invest that money and time and effort?
Well, you never know until you know, until you never know until you go. So, you know, the way I bolted that route was I started at the top and I would go down. I think the top section was what I would call a slab, which means it was just gently overhanging. And that was, I forgot, 40, 50 feet. And I bolted a wrap down, swung in, put a bolt in, and I look at that section and go, that's like 13A. Okay, I'll go down farther. I go down farther and I go, oh, that's like V V5, that boulder problem between these two holes. And I would just keep going. And then I'm finding boulder problems are like, that's like V10, and I'm in my trainers on a cold day, just trying kind of, you sort of try the moves. You get a really good idea after enough root development of how hard something's going to be. And every time I went down, I could still see myself doing each section. And then, but when I got to the bottom, I thought I can't see myself doing the whole thing ever. That is something that can be done, but not by me and not by anyone I knew at the time.
Not by anyone at the time, right? Like it's the, North America's first 515B, we would call it now. And that grade, I mean, at that time in 94, what was the top of the grade? Like 14B maybe?
I think I bolted that in 92. And
92? Okay.
yeah, so then Sharma did it in 2007, which was what, 15 years or.
But in 92, the top of the highest grade anybody had climbed. When did Scott Franklin climb Scarface? It was 14A. That was right around that
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, and this is so much harder than 14A. It's a joke.
Yeah.
Like people that just look at grades and go, oh, 15A, 15B, 15C, 15D. When you get to the top of the grades, those are huge jumps.
They are, yeah.
And I climbed 14B at the hardest, at my personal hardest. So I'm not anywhere close to climbing Jumbo Love.
What was the experience like of watching, Chris climb this route that you'd envisioned?
It's the most fun I've had not climbing a route, And it was weird to say that because I've always wanted to climb every project I bolted, but I actually, in a way, enjoyed it more that it was too hard for me and that I saw someone else do it. Because that's progress, right? That's the sport. And we all want to see that. We all want to see, if we were as good as the best we got was the best we were in, say, the mid 90s when I was climbing my best, then that wouldn't be that exciting. But look, the sport keeps moving ahead. So that's cool.
That's really cool, huh?
And Sharma will see someone climb something he bolted that he'll never do.
Right.
It just happens that way.
Yeah. So, one of the things that you said was you like to try to create classics that others will repeat and love when you're setting up and developing routes and crags. It's such an interesting idea that you're building an architecture for other people's joy. Where does it come from? Like, why, what is the wellspring of this motivation for you to do this and like you just said about the experience watching Chris and I can attest to, having experienced this from my side in small ways. It is so fun to watch people climb your routes and love them, right? Like it's such a cool experience, but why do it? Like, is it like ego death? Is it ego manifestation? Like, where does that come from? What is the impetus for that?
It's probably like walking into a house somewhere for a guy who's done a tile job in his shower and it's perfect. And you walk in and you go, you did that tile job? That is amazing. Look at that. And they're proud, right? It's pride, I guess. And I work really hard at my routes to make them right. If they're not right, I'll spend time cleaning them, moving the bolts, doing whatever I need to do to try to make it a really good route. And so if someone recognizes that and enjoys it, it's satisfying. It's a recognition of all the hard work you put in. It would be no fun to put up these routes and no one ever does them.
When you look back at sort of that teenage intensity that took you from first being exposed to climbing at 14 to climbing a big wall in Yosemite at age 17 to, all the way through all your climbing achievements to Jumbo Love. What is the thread that connects all those versions of Randy the climber?
Well, all the climb, and I've done a lot of different types of climbs, new climbs, and I also the biggest compliment I get is when people say, "Oh, that's a Leavitt route." It's really good. And so if it's a Leavitt route, then hopefully people will like it. If they're challenged, it's in a way that I intended, not like a way I didn't intend. I don't want people to hurt themselves, but I want them to have to push themselves a little higher above a bolt sometimes. And I want it to be a quality experience. And you can't control the rock, but you can sort of choose what rocks you spend your time on and where you put your efforts. So it's always nice to see that.
And what is the thread that connect? What is the thread that's continuous from Randy the house painter to Randy the, you know, are you retired? Is that a word we can use?
Yeah.
What is that thread, and how is it similar to or different than the climber thread? Because it feels very different, but maybe there's a connection in there I don't see.
Well, I mean, as you get older, you have to change what your expectations of yourself are and what your goals are and what's realistic. So I feel like I'm just trying to get old gracefully and still enjoy things and still be a good person and set a good example for people if they're younger and they're looking up to me. It's just, uh, I don't know what the thread is when you're done. I mean, in 50 years after I'm dead, probably no one will remember who I am. It's just that's kind of the nature. Everyone sort of remembers George Washington, but all these other people who are probably in some ways as important or more to our country or in other situations, they just don't remember them. So at the end of the day, you just have to look at yourself in the mirror and say, I did, I did my best, and I did the right thing. And as a person, that gives me joy. I've got a beautiful wife and a nice marriage, so I'm grateful for that. Things have gone pretty well for me. I've had my challenges, but I just try to keep things moving forward. Not try to rest on what I've done, but just be content and happy with what I'm doing.
How do you be content and happy when you're with what you're doing when you're looking so far forward all the time? It feels to me like that's what you're doing. Jumbo Love is like, well, I can't do this, but I'm going to bolt it up anyway. That's in a way looking forward. Putting up roots for others, I think, is by itself a looking forward. Like, this doesn't exist now. I'm going to bring it into existence so that others can experience this piece of rock.
You mean as far as the first ascent goes? Because all the routes that I bolted and developed for first ascents, I had every intention of being able to do them. But
Mm,
there's some of them that there's probably a dozen of them at least that I left that I wasn't able to do. And
mm,
I knew someone else stronger had to do it. So, it starts out with the idea that you're going to do it yourself.
okay.
I have a belief in what I can do, but also I'm realistic. I'm not the best climber, never was, but I was maybe one of the most motivated ones. So I was willing to keep going back there and build the thing in my gym. And I remember one time when I was working on Planet Earth, my first 514, I had built Planet Earth in my home climbing gym. I drove 5.5 hours out to the Virgin River Gorge and a half an hour short of getting there, 6 hour mark, half hour short of that, they had closed the freeway and I couldn't get there.
Oh,
And so I had to turn around and drive home. So I left at 4 a.m. I got home that afternoon and I did my Planet Earth boulder problem like 10 out of 10 times in my garage, which is the first time I'd ever done it. And so I felt like, wow, I'd made a lot of progress on this route and I never even got to the route today. It was the biggest success. And I did the route soon after that. But yeah, I'm always believing I can do it or working towards it.
I think there's these threads. Like, there's this integrity that comes with, like, you know the pride. I mean, you've used a lot of words like, you around integrity, I would say, leaving things for others, creating things for others. Of course, you want to do them, like you said, but it's beyond that. You want to have good. If you just wanted to do them, you'd do the minimum, right? But you're not just
Hmm.
doing the minimum. You're taking a lot of pride, a lot of integrity in what your creation is, and you expect it to have a long life after you, whether they remember you or not. You don't seem to care, and that's fine. But there's a work ethic and an integrity that you're bringing to that I suspect, whether you I don't know, that was the same in your real estate career. Like, there, you worked hard. I heard you talk about how hard you worked, and you developed, knowledge, you developed relationships, you developed an area, but narrow, like, you had, sounds like you had a specific area of San Diego where you worked, and that that gave you like this long-term advantage that, and I think a lot of people don't see that kind of work as being valuable, and they don't put in that amount of time. And where does that where does that come from? Like, what is the wellspring of that? What is the seed of that willingness to, first of all, envision it, and then second of all, to actually go out and show up every day, and like, pay, make the maps on your wall and take the pictures and read about foreclosures every week, or whatever, however it is that you got the information. Then there'd be a different version of it now, as you said, but where does that come from?
I can't really answer that. I do know I have it in me.
Hmm.
Even a
Obviously.
60, even a 65-year-old guy. Like last year, I was 64, and I did a landscaping project in my yard, and I had to hire some laborers, and they would look at me like, "Whoa, look at this dude! Look at him go!" They'd have to step up their game, and they're like 25 years old. But so I've always respected work and worked hard, and the product of work, being whether you're building a house or building a climb or whatever you're doing, is important to me. And maybe that's just inherent. Maybe it's from my parents. I don't know all the chemicals that make up a person, how it happens. I can't answer that. But I was blessed with it. I know I have that. Maybe cursed with it, some would say, because I have partners that just like, oh my God, Randy, we want to quit for today, but he wants to do a whole nother pitch. He wants to wrap down this other section of the wall, and we just want to go home. And oh no, why is he running the show today? So
uh,
yeah, it can be a blessing and a curse.
Yeah, I understand that. When I have hired people to work with me at FL Athlete, one of the things I'll tell them in sort of an interview, I don't know if we really do interviews, but I'll communicate early on as like, I know I'm a little bit like that, in the sense that I can be really intense, I can be too much, and that's what you're signing up for. Like, I'm just out with it now. Like, I used to sort of be almost ashamed of it. Like, because people will try to shame you for it. Like, why do you have to do that? We just want to go home, like that kind of thing.
Hmm.
And it takes a certain strength to be like, hey, no, this is what I want to do. This is what I came to do. This is what we came to do, and we're going to see it through. And and there's like this kind of tension a lot of times around that.
Yeah, I've seen it, and earlier in my life, I didn't see it. I had these blinders on. I'm just moving towards that goal and working hard and doing stuff. But as you get older, you get more aware of actually how you interact with people and how it affects them. And so I do see it. Sometimes I
Mhm.
try to just kind of collar it a little bit so everyone can just kick back and have a good day. But when it comes to climbing, I feel like, especially we're in San Diego, we've been doing some really long approaches, and we've hiked for 2.5 hours to get to the crag. Let's make the most of the day. Let's get up at 4 in the morning and then hike out in the dark. But I'm also the kind of guy where I was in my business, I would be in a suit walking around looking at a property and there's trash on the ground, I'd pick it up. I don't like to see stuff being undone that needs to be done. So I think it's just programmed in me.
Don't color that,
Okay.
Randy. Just unleash it all. I love it.
Okay.
So, I think it's so uh, interesting. I sort of see this From my perspective, Randy, one of the things that, I've been an admirer of yours. I grew up reading, climbing magazine and Rock and Ice and the hot flashes, remember that? That's how we used to get our climbing
Hmm.
news. And you're always in there doing, something and pushing the boundaries, creating all these new routes. And I didn't aspire to be like a rock climber so much, of course, but I just loved that you were just out there in your zone, like creating Virgin River Gorge, creating, Clark Mountain climbing, creating climbing around San Diego, not creating the rocks, but developing and opening places up for people. And it's so interesting for me to get to hear about, your business trajectory, your business life. One thing we didn't get to talk about that I was hoping to talk about is your flying. I consider myself a student pilot. You've been flying for a while and get to fly your own Bonanza. And, you've been able to pull all these things together in this kind of combination of energy, discipline, uh, kind of deferred gratification, and this I think the French would say je ne sais quoi, this zest for life, this spice, the secret ingredient that makes Randy Leavitt, has a that enabled you to unlock all these things we didn't even talk about off with climbing or levitation, right? Like
Hmm.
there's all these aspects to, you just being who you are and showing up authentically as Randy, and that has opened up all these experiences and opportunities for other people, whether it's having a nice apartment to live in or having a nice route to climb. And I just think it's a wonderful legacy that is not even close to being over. I'm not reading your eulogy or anything here, but I think it is very poetic and I really admire it. So I just want to say thank you for all that you've contributed to my community and our community. It's just been incredible.
I think one of the things I've learned is it's okay to be a beginner. I see a lot of guys who are like me that are good at their respective sports that don't want to get outside of their lane and try to be something new, to be a beginner. But everything that I've done, I had to be a total beginner at, make mistakes. I'm trying wing foiling now, and I'm finally to the point where, yeah, hey, I'm not, I'm decent at it, but it took a lot of time. So time and being a beginner it's a natural thing to have to go through. So don't be afraid of that.
Do you think it's hard to be a beginner when you're already an expert in something else?
For me, I like the process there, but there's a lot of people who don't. They
Hmm.
just don't want to be a beginner at anything. They want to be the expert they are at what they do.
And what do you say to them?
Just open your mind. Just be a beginner. It's okay.
Hmm.
It's fun to learn. Learning is fun. Like you know, as being a private pilot, that you learn so much as a pilot. It's just you learn more about things that you never thought you'd have to learn, and it's just a great learning experience. So it's just enjoy it.
Yeah.
And when are you a private pilot? Do you have your license, or are you still a student pilot?
Yeah, I'm still a student pilot. I have only a check ride, so I'm close.
Oh, you're getting ready for your check ride.
Yeah.
Well, you know, they say that the private pilot certificate is just a license to learn. So I
Right.
consider myself still a student pilot. I'm commercial instrument rated, but I still feel like I'm learning, and I'll train and learn. And it's just really interesting. And that's one reason I love aviation, is just the rabbit hole of information and learning that you get to do.
That's what I'm loving too. It's just so, and getting to be a beginner again. I also, like you, I love being a beginner. I love learning, and it's just like, oh wow, there's this whole, like, all of these rabbit holes are universes like you talked about earlier, and it's just a fascinating one. It's like, I had to relearn trigonometry for my navigation. I was like, oh man, I haven't done this since I was 16. But it was like, what a
Yeah.
great opportunity to get to remember how all this works and why and everything. So yeah, it's
And,
incredible.
and the great part is you'll forget it all by the time you have as
Yeah.
many hours as me,
Yeah.
because you have all these other aids. And then someday you'll have to go back and say, oh yeah, that's something I learned as a private pilot. And I, and I suck, because I don't remember it.
And I got to learn it again, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
we're always learning. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time, Randy. I really appreciate you. This has been an incredible conversation, and I'm sure the Voice of the Mountains diehard listeners will really love this episode. Uh, Hope we get to cross paths again in real life sometime soon.
I think we'll go flying together. How's that?
That sounds amazing. I would
And
love
thanks
that.
for having me here. I really appreciate it. It was great to talk with you.
Thanks, Randy. Thanks so much. One of the most common questions I get is, how should I get started with training? Well, they say the first step is the hardest, so let's make that easy. We are offering free 4-week samples of our most popular training plans for mountaineering, trail running, climbing, and more. Go to uphillathlete.com/letsgo to sign up for our newsletter, and you will not only get monthly insights on training for uphill athletes, but you'll also get a sample training plan. It's totally free, so why wait? That's uphillathlete.com/LETSGO.